Beautiful. Hello, Sirens. Welcome to the Silver Sirens Virtual Sanctuary and to our book club. This month, we are looking at when we become strangers, how loneliness leaks into our lives, and what we can do about it with Maggie Hamilton. So I'm really honored and excited to have Maggie here today. Maggie, we'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all Silver Sirens for joining in tonight for this beautiful work. I want to first of all say thank you for the beautiful work you're doing and the topics that you are canvassing, because it's so important. And, you know, I feel as a mature woman, we have a lot of power in society. We have power to make change, and I think often we can do it gently but intelligently. And you know, we talk in other cultures about eldership, and that's what I feel with this book and my other social research books, is is the opportunity to gently share what I have researched, so that in a way that is like a discovery. And I'm hoping that will be the case tonight for us to understand more about ourselves and each other. So loneliness, I've actually come up with a view after looking at this really profoundly for a couple of years, that a number of things. First of all, that often loneliness is a number of little bad habits we've fallen into, bad habits that have major repercussions, but small in the sense that they can be reversed. And I feel there are so many wonderful ways, and we'll look at that, where we can really turn loneliness around, and particularly for those of us who live in cities, because, and we're going to talk about that later, I feel very passionate about cities not being lonely spaces, and they certainly don't need to be. But I feel at the core of loneliness is that it is often because we actually don't know who we are as people. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, you know, through all the influences we have now, social media and hundreds of other pressures to be in the world, that it's very easy to fall out of knowing who we are as individuals. And this doesn't have to be some great intellectual exercise, but it's just that being able to tune into our hearts and knowing what feeds us. Because if we don't know what feeds us, how do we know who to draw to us and what to draw to us? And I think when we are connected in with ourselves, then the second circle of pushing aside loneliness is understanding that we are connected to every living, not just every living person, but every living thing, and particularly also to nature. And that's something in the West, I think, that's a real challenge. So I wanted to start off by talking about our children, because they're our tomorrow. And I have to say, I'm not a mum. I would love to have been a mum, but that never happened. But for the last couple of decades, I've had a real passion for our kids, because I really feel that they need our nourishment, and they need us to understand what things are like for them. So I found some really interesting things when I was researching the book. And the chapter I have on children, one of the things that I've found is that we know that our kids are the most lonely on the planet of age groups, which is a very sad thing, lonelier than elderly people. One of the things I've found is that our children now are lacking touch. Now, I know touch has become a complex thing, you know, because nobody wants our children to experience inappropriate touch. But because I think of the nervousness around touching children, but also just the busyness, our children are not getting held and stroked and nourished in that very physical way that kids of previous generations did. And I had a lovely big Scottish dad, and one of the things I loved most was sitting on his lap as a little girl and him telling me a story, my head against his chest, and actually the vibration of his voice into my being And what's happening with these children who are lacking touch is that they're starting to suffer from some of the complaints that the elderly do, like fibromyalgia, which is a very painful muscle complaint. So this is one of the things I must say, since I knew that with the children in my life, the little ones, when they come around or I'm around at their place, I always try to make a point of sitting on the sofa with them, or perhaps we're sitting in the backyard and putting my arm around them. And I notice now that those kids, and some of them now 14, 15, they come for a hug and to lie on my shoulder, because we all need that kind of physical warmth. Another thing is that our children are not getting dirty. You know, because we kind of have this view with all the billions spent on marketing, our children have to look like they've stepped out of designer pages. Parents are very reluctant to allow kids messy, muddy play. And again, this is denying these children the sensory experience of being here and being alive on the planet. And it's really important that our children do get messy and do get dirty and down and dirty and play in the puddles, because they're connecting with Mother Earth. It's grounding them. And another thing that I learned actually through a piece of research in the UK, they found that the lack of connection in nature now is such in the UK that British prisoners in prison are getting more time outside a day than are the average British kids. And we can sit here in Oz and say to ourselves, oh, well, you know, that's the UK, you know, we're the great outdoor country. But how many of our kids are getting outside to play for an hour a day? Not many, I suspect. And so that whole ability to, again, connect with nature, you know, to have that tree that you love and you climb in and you sit in and you hang from, all those experiences are going. And this is actually affecting our kids' limbs, would you believe? And also it's affecting their bones, because that jumping off, you know, tree branches and all that, you know, that sort of play is actually strengthening our kids' bones. So there are a whole lot of little nuances, and this is what I mean by saying these are nuances we can easily fix. We don't have to go off and do a PhD about holding children, or, you know, having them in the garden, getting dirty, and getting them, allowing them the joy of that. I think that's the other thing, the joy of it, instead of, you know, don't make a mess and get those clothes off, we have to change. So these are little things we can really work with our children. And, you know, the social media stuff is obvious, so I'm not going to talk about that. But also, I think we have to be very aware, we have to be very aware of the amount of time we spend on devices. And there's a very interesting piece of research that I have in the book from the University of Minnesota, I think it was. And they got 18 plus to, I think it was 30 plus, to sit in a room for 15 minutes by themselves. They knew they were going to do this beforehand, and there was nothing to do except administer a mild electric shock to yourself. And there was something like 80% of the people in that study chose to administer an electric shock rather than sit there for 15 minutes doing nothing. And before we get too superior about this, the researchers thought, well, this isn't great. Perhaps we ought to expand the age group, which they did, into the 70s. And guess what? The results were pretty much the same. So we need to be very aware of that, and also aware that when particularly a device is around, that flattens conversation, and our kids need to learn to be talking a lot more than they are at the moment. It is really difficult now for kids to connect with people, you know, like talking at the bus stop, those casual conversations that connect kids into the community. Kids are finding really hard to do now. And by kids, I'm meaning not just, you know, primary school kids or even high school kids, but are kind of grown-ups in the 20s are finding it very hard at university, in the workplace, because they have not had that practice. So us being able to give that opportunities of one-on-one conversations when we're with the kids in our lives, and if they're out with us, for them to see us modeling, having a chat to somebody, lovely day, all that sort of stuff is really important for giving them those little cues of how they can start to grow their own community. And there's just one little last thing I want to share, and then I want to hear from you, because I don't want to, you know, be lecturing at you, but I get very excited about all this stuff. One of the best ways I think we can really help our kids to learn to grow their own community, which is incredibly important, grow their own village for their future, is when we have a social event happening at home, like a barbecue, and giving them specific tasks that they need to do, choosing things that they're good at. So they might be good at putting the fairy lights up, you know, they might have a favorite recipe, things that the adults are going to notice and comment on. So that gives them a kind of feeling of belonging, because they get that feedback. Love those lights. Yum, that was great banana loaf or whatever. But then we also task them with taking care of one or two guests. And it's often a good thing if it's an elderly person. You know, let's say it's Mrs. Thing up the road, the neighbor who they know. I want you to just keep an eye on Mrs. Thing and just make sure she has enough to eat and drink and that she's okay. And, you know, just keep an eye on her. You don't have to be with her all the time, but also it'd be good to have a little chat with her and see how she's going. And once you start to do this with the kids, and then when everybody's gone, you might be too tired to do it that night, but have a debrief. How's Mrs. Thing going? Oh, she's, you know, she's having to go to the doctors next week because she's so-and-so, or she seemed a bit sad, or she told me this funny story. So we all laugh about the funny story. We're concerned about the fact she's got to go to the doctors. Oh, so what do you think we should do? She's going next Wednesday. What do you think we could do to kind of help her with that? And what you're doing is you're starting to give them the cues to how you build those communities. Because one of the problems at the moment is we're all in our generational silos. And I have this view, no generation has a franchise, exclusive franchise on brilliance or stupidity. We have a mix of both in every generation. So we all have our Achilles heels and we all have our brilliance. But if you put the generations together, often an Achilles heel in one generation is a strength in another. So those are a few things I've learned on the children front, and I'd love to hear from you. Any questions, any comments?
Thank you, Maggie. Please feel free to put your hand up or write something in the chat, but I'm just going to add something quickly while you're getting ready.
Right.
I really loved what you said about the children being allocated one person to look after. You know, I remember us growing up, we certainly did bring the drinks around. You know, our mother would bring the drinks, we'll have our roles, you know, and then sometimes we'd be like performing, you know, like do a dance for them. I remember a lot of that. You know, but we didn't go to the extent of then checking in. How was that person, or what did you hear, or, you know, we weren't included in that way. So I really, really liked that idea. Just felt really exciting, you know, and it's such a great way of modeling. It's also a way of, it's that thing of telling and doing. It's just for them to actually experience it. So it was really experiential in the moment. So I really love that. So thank you for that. There's lots of other things.
Pleasure, Faye.
Yeah. Now, anyone want to put up their hand? I was going to go straight to Jill because I know Jill usually. So one thing I really want to kind of state too, that this generation that we're talking about, these are the generations that would be most of the women here that have grandchildren. This would be the
Yeah.
age of the grandchildren. So I'm really conscious that, you know, how do we engage them? How can we as grandparents engage and help those children? So just thinking about some of those. Who would like to make a comment? I can't see everyone. So just Chanel. Okay, I can see Jill and Chanel. So Janelle, yours went up first. So you go, Jeanette, Chanel, then we'll come to you, Jill, afterwards. Go, Chanel.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi everyone. Um, it's so true what you're saying, because I recently, for Christmas, I went to the Caribbean to see my mum and my gran. And because growing up, my family from St. Lucia on my mum's side, so they speak patchwork, a broken French. And at least now they understand, okay, we didn't teach another language. Oops. So when they told the jokes, they had to like translate into English for me. But it was so good to sit with them and chat. And like, so my gran would be like, okay, you're going to Auntie Baby because her sister lives around the corner. And it just fed my soul. And it's so true, because even today, I've had people's kids have come up to me and they've given me a hug, or they want to talk, and they're just like, they say, thank you so much, because they're so used, because we are cut off, and it's adults as well. Like, you go on a date and a guy will have less social skills now because he knows, I met you on a dating app. You ain't got to talk, like, I ain't got to do much. I've met you now. It's like, I'm here.
Yeah.
But it is that we're lacking the social skills, and it's so sad. Like, you know, people, my friends say the same with like devices. You've got to cut them off. You've got to get people talking again. It's so important.
And I love what you said about it feeding the soul, because I think everything we're talking about here is about feeding these little souls, and in turn it feeds our souls as well, to see that. And it's not difficult stuff, and this is what I really want to get across, because I think sometimes the way we characterize loneliness, and I'm not saying it isn't severe for some people and they are paralyzed by it, but for a lot of people, it's just skills they've never learned or they've forgotten about. And it's about, I think, starting to be creative about how we connect with each other, and creating an excitement for this new generation. And then another piece of research I did some years back into girls and boys, teenagers, looking at all their 21st century issues, you know, the happy stuff like porn and binge drinking and all that. What was really interesting with those kids, where they had grandparents or they had that either auntie who they were related to, or who they weren't related to but was their auntie, they had those people in their lives. Those people were like their ocean of calm, because mum and dad are so busy that they're rushing a million miles. But I could not believe how much these kids valued. And I remember one beautiful, buffy 17-year-old boy saying to me, I love my nan. And I said, oh, that's great. And he said, she makes the best tuna bake in the world. And then he paused, and I could see he had something else to say, but it was, will I risk saying it to this, you know, I'm a virtual stranger. And then he said to me, and you know what, Maggie? I said, what? He said, she makes it just for me. So for him, that was sacred, that tuna bake. That he, when he was eating that, was eating all the love that had been invested in that. Wow. This is the stuff that can change the planet. It really can. Thank you.
Yeah.
That sounds like a fantastic trip to St. Lucia.
Thank you. Okay, Jill,
My
let's go
gran
over
did
to
that. I
you.
just want to say my gran did that. My gran made all the food that I like. She did that because I was there, so I know the feeling.
Oh,
Yeah, it's
how
beautiful.
fabulous. And that feeds the soul. Yeah, gorgeous. Gorgeous.
I'm going to hand over to Jill. Just unmuting you. There you go.
So thank you, Maggie, and thank you, Faith, and hello to everyone.
Hi.
Thank you. It's such an important subject, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I grew up in an extended family where my parents and my brother and I lived on the other side of the street, 4 doors up from my aunt and uncle. And when my grandmother passed away, my grandfather came to live with my aunt and uncles. So we had that extended family. But my parents, they loved to entertain. And my brother and I, we had jobs. And
Right.
when I have 2 daughters who are 37 and 35, and when they were little, they wanted to join brownies, like Girl Guide, you know.
Yes.
And because there was a waiting list, the district leader, who'd been a teacher, said, only if you can start a new unit. So a friend and I, we agreed to train, and we did that. And so from when our daughters were like 6 right up to 14, 15, you know, they were in the different stages of it. And it was a community and a neighborhood, and some of their friends were in it. And when you were saying about, you know, the devices and everything, it made me think of a scene in a very good series on SBS On Demand called Better Things by Pamela Adlon, who's a bit of an auteur. In season 5, episode 10, the last episode in the series. I mean, there are you know, there's language that's a bit crude, you know, and so, you know, but it's a very interesting series. But the last episode got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and there's a scene in it where she's actually directing her younger daughter, who is doing a scene that she has written on why would you relate to a robot, and it's all sort of acted out, and with people dressed up with masks on either side, standing on either side of this little girl, while she, you know, does, it's almost like a rap, why would you relate to a robot. Yeah, too many robots.
Yes, and look, I really want to honor you for, you know, I mean, mums are busy, but you took the challenge to, you know, learn and then offer that whole offering for other kids rather than going, oh, that's too hard. And I think this is also part of connection. You know, sometimes connection can be inconvenient, exhausting, confusing, conflicting sometimes, let's be honest. Us human beings have a way of, you know, stuffing it up sometimes, but that's all the part of the richness of it. And I just think that's wonderful that you did that. I want to honor that because, you know, that was a huge commitment.
Oh, it was a wonderful time. I did it for 6 years, and it was I was working part-time though. And so it was a great kind of bridge between mothering and work, which were very different silos, and being part of the community. But I'd seen my parents do that. They were volunteers. They'd been in organizations.
And that brings up another theme, doesn't it? That, you know, that whole thing of volunteering is so, our communities couldn't exist without it. And to have had that modeled is such a good thing.
Beautiful. Great. Okay, well, let's go back to the next theme. Do you want to do parenting or reality TV? Yeah, parenting.
Yeah, I'll talk just for a sec about parenting. I think one of the things that, and we know this already, is that, and when I give talks about this where there are lots of parents, I can actually see parents getting a bit emotional when I say parenting can be very lonely. Because I think, you know, parents don't like to admit to that, but let's face it, living in a city, so often you don't have the extended family around. You might not even have the family in the same country. And so you don't necessarily have that experience of children around you. And suddenly you're out of the workplace and everybody else around you's at work. It can be lonely. And one of the things that I look at in the book is parents who jump on Facebook all the time and, you know, record everything the kids are doing, and how that really takes away from a child's story and a child's ability to choose what they tell of their story later on. But also the other thing is, I think one of the worries is that our children are growing up just with their peers. They're not mixing with people of many generations, and certainly not diverse people, also with their stories and what culturally they can bring to the family, and what the family can bring to them, of course. So you've got children living in a little bubble, but also parents are the same, that they're often just mixing with people their own age. And that makes, it's very comforting to have people going through the same stuff as you do, but it can create quite a narrow view. And so one of the things that I really encourage all the parents that I talk to is to get themselves a couple of older friends. And I talk about the experience of older friends I had, friends who've now passed over, who were just wonderful in terms of anchoring me, in terms of, when there's a drama at work or in a relationship, and then you go to see the older friend and they might be suffering from, something or other, or dear friends, being given a terminal diagnosis or whatever it is. And suddenly, everything's in perspective. Perhaps the fact that the boss snapped at you yesterday isn't that important. So I think for you, as mature women, to know your worth, to know the worth that you have to parents. And the only other thing I'd say on the parenting front is that, when I was growing up, kids' emotions weren't taken into account. You were seen and not heard, and you did as your parents said, and that was kind of it. And then of course psychology blossomed, and we're all very aware of everybody's emotions, but it can create its own burden for parents, where if a child is upset, they can freak out and see this as some sort of failure, rather than the fact that life's messy and emotions happen. And it's very easy for young parents then to fall into the trap of being either the entertainer or the person who just buys them stuff all the time. And that's always something that when I talk about it with parents in the audience, you get that kind of nervous laughter as people recognize themselves, rather than creating a family culture that allows for emotions and teaches kids by modeling. I'm feeling a bit sad today, I'm a bit grumpy today, so that the kids can learn to understand their emotions. And what parents and grandparents and older friends are there to do are also there to help kids learn to self-soothe. Most of us do not have the big tantrum, screaming and carrying on in the workplace. I say most because I think there's always the odd person who goes completely off piste. But we don't do that because we've learned that's not appropriate. And I always say to younger friends, that's what the loos are there for, apart from needing to go for a pee. If you need to go and have a cry, or you just need to kind of let off some steam, go to the work toilet. So I just mentioned those things for parents. They need the friendships, mature friendships, to nourish them, and to kind of mirror back to them that they're doing a good job, and that, tomorrow's another day. So I just thought I'd mention those few things before we perhaps go on to reality TV or some of the other juicy topics. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the thing with parenting, especially when a person, there's no extended family, that idea of the community coming in. And I was at a Women in Media event in the Gold Coast a few years ago, and this woman grabbed me. She knew what I was doing with Civil Sirens, and she was telling me about this idea, and I've not been able to track her down, because there are quite a few of us like you, myself, who don't have children, they were kind of bringing in people like us into the family so that the family had another adult that could come in with different experiences, different worldviews, and just assist the parent too. So the parent's got another adult that comes in that's kind of almost emotionally there to kind of hold space for the kids as well. I thought that was such a
love
great
that.
idea, but I've not been able to track the woman down to find out if she managed to get this off, because I think that would be an amazing thing for us sirens that are not parents, you know, that we could
Yes.
actually be part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, go Monique.
Yeah, just following on from what Faith was saying. So I've got relatives that have got children, and I'm an auntie and I don't have children. And I think it really depends on the family dynamic. So in one family, the children, if they don't want to interact or sit at the table, they're allowed to do. They're like little kings and queens, and they have more authority than the adults. But then in the other family, I can tell a child off if they're sticking their hand in the cookie jar and haven't washed it and it just comes straight out of the toilet, that type of thing. Give you an extreme example because that's, so I just find that, yeah, I think it's nice to think of it all as rosy, but I think it's kind of these days where there's lots of different values with lots of different families, particularly with the Gen X kids. And yeah, I think that's a whole.
And these things aren't easy. I think humor is often a good way of being able to cut across that. But you're right. We have to read the room, and we have to see when it's, I mean, there's some parts of my family where I can't say anything.
Yeah.
But then I've decided I will be an encourager. I won't encourage bad behavior, but to kind of break down some of the barriers with positivity by, praising their good qualities, so that, because I think often younger parents feel got at a lot, that everybody has a view on how to parent. And I think if they feel you're not, and I'm not suggesting for a minute you are doing this, but I think once they realize you're not sitting there with the mental clipboard and using a bit of humor in that and relaxing, sometimes then there is the opportunity. But sometimes it might not be the family. I mean, families are very complicated and they can be the hardest to deal with, but it might be neighbors. I mean, I live in an apartment block, and there's some great little families in the building, and, having got to know the kids' names and, what they're doing and stuff, those interactions are really lovely, and you can see that the parents really value that, even if it's just to ride up and down in the lift, or, it warms the day for the parents. And I think that's something we can do. And there are times when we also have to speak our truth about stuff. And I think we just have to be able to read it when it's appropriate to do that.
Yeah, I just think that the idea of it takes a village to raise a child, that very age-old idea, which has worked for thousands of years, is hit and miss these days with families, and that you've got to really be aware of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of sensitivities, I think. And I think, there's a lot of parents who aren't necessarily coping because, cost of living crisis, work pressures, all those sorts of things.
I'm just talking about their values. I'm not talking about
but you add those on as well, and it makes it very complicated. The values. And I think also you're always very aware that I mean, I'm a boomer, and you're always very aware that you can almost read the hidden text sometimes. Oh, well, you would think because you're a boomer. So I think I use humor a lot because I think that helps. But we all have to, it has to be what comes naturally to us. And humor's always been a way for me when it's awkward to kind of bridge things. And it's not about a perfect world or a perfect childhood. I think it's really important that we constantly affirm that life's messy, because I think one of the problems with the modern world is we do want everything perfect. We go to Woolies or Coles and we want lemons to be all looking the same. And, you know, I mean, I love the odd bunch at Woolies, you know, because it's what I grew up with. That's what we loved, was things all different shapes. And I kind of feel like we, again, like the kids, we need to embrace the messiness. And I love India. I've traveled there a couple of times, and one of the things I love about India is when things go wrong, the first thing Indian people do is laugh. And the first time that happened, I was really shocked, because I thought, this is, you know, I could feel that kind of Western, you know, very anal, you know, this is serious. Why is that person laughing? And now I just think it's the most wonderful thing, because it kind of breaks the ice, and, you know, and then you get into solving it. I think it's actually quite sane. Yeah. Thank you for that.
That's okay. Just
Thank you.
to add on, I've got a friend in London, and I was talking to her, and she was telling me about her child, and I said, oh, so she was chucking a tanty, and my English friend's like, what?
You didn't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I said, well, if you put one hand on your hip and you say chucking a tanty removes the energy from tantrum down to tanty, and chucking, and you've got one hand on your hip and you say it with a smile, you deflate the tantrum. She's like, oh, anyway.
I love that. That was a lovely way of describing it. Brilliant. And
Yeah.
that's that sense of humor again.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. So just looking at the timing, maybe we can go into the cities, because I think that's a lot of hope in that.
Yeah.
Maggie, okay.
Yeah, so in the book on loneliness, I really wanted the last few chapters to be very up. I mean, I'm hoping the whole read is more interesting than down, but the cities absolutely grabbed me, because what I found is just some astonishing stuff happening across the planet. And one of them is the livable cities. And there's this fabulous architect called Jan Gehl, who's now in his 80s. And when he started his practice in Denmark, this was the time, for those of us who were around at that time, do you remember when cities suddenly became freeways and wind tunnels and high rise, and it was all about moving the traffic around? And it was like we forgot that cities are supposed to be there for people, and they became really not very hospitable places to be, because of the wind tunnels, because of the, you know, parts of them were in shade all day, and of course then there was cars zipping about and you didn't want to get run over. So he did something rather interesting. He went on a tour around old Europe, and he looked at the old towns, because he was trying to come up with a model that would work for people. And he came up with this theory called the human scale, which is quite brilliant. And that is, he realized when he was, you know, like in Italy, and the little piazzas where you've got people of all ages sitting around having a cuppa, walking the dog, you know, playing with the children. There's multiple things going on, and everybody feels very nourished. And he actually realized that there is a measurable scale to what makes us feel comfortable. And in fact, he was used in Melbourne for Federation Square and the revival of all those little alleyways in Melbourne that we love. You know, there's little places where we can go and discover, you know, the little whoever, chocolate maker or whatever. And part of the Federation Square thing is, you know, the deck chairs, and it's about creating pedestrian friendly cities. And so that you have the streets, some streets just blocked off, no traffic, or perhaps just like the light rail that we have in the city, but also trees, because people need shade, places to sit for people that are not where, you know, you don't have to be buying a cup of coffee or something to be able to sit down. And the idea is that you can enter those spaces and you may want to interact with other people, or you mightn't. And he calls that, he's got this beautiful phrase called alone together. And, you know, we've had those moments, we might be in the city and we're by ourselves and we're not particularly wanting to, you know, chitty chat with people. We just want to be. And so we sit and the world flows past us and we notice that strange dog we've never seen before, and the child who's, you know, running around driving the mother crazy. But then somebody comes to sit next to us, and because that vibe has warmed us, we are naturally inclined, if they say something, or if we're sort of person who doesn't mind starting up a conversation. My husband's always saying to me, I've never met a stranger yet. You know, he finds it hard to talk to people he doesn't know, and he finds it a bit embarrassing when I'm always engaging people in conversation. Basically because I'm very curious, or you might say I'm a very nosy person. Anyway, you feel like you want to connect with that person, and you might just talk about the weather or the fact that the city's looking great or it's about to be spring. You might only have a couple of sentences, but it nourishes you, it nourishes the other person. So this work now has gone around the world. And what he has created, and we see it around Barangaroo as well. I'm not sure, because I'm not there so much during the week, how successful it is, but in Barangaroo, so that the design is so that when you're at street level, there'll be awnings and there'll be trees and other things. As far as your visuals are concerned, it's within the human scale, but in fact, the buildings might be 20 or 30 stories high. And the idea is that if those are residential, that when people come down from their own place, they then come into this situation where it's safe, it's nurturing, there's stuff going on, and you can engage as much or as little as you want to. And we've also now discovered that the way frontages of buildings are designed, because that was the other thing in the 60s, you know, these horrible concrete monoliths. Pardon me, what they found was people avoid those areas because not only is it not nourishing, but they have this feeling because it's not warm, it's not safe. So they don't hang around in those spaces. But what they've found is that if you create really interesting frontages to these high-rise buildings, we will hang around. And they've even done experiments where they've found that, you know, if a person feels more able to ask another person for directions or to just make a comment to them because of the frontage feels friendly, it's like something in us opens up. And then, of course, the other thing is getting across the city. So you have cities like Copenhagen, where you can cycle across the city totally safely. So children are cycling with parents from 5, and the city is so safe, as far as parents judge it, that by the age of 10, those children are often allowed to cycle across those spaces to go and see a friend on their cycle. So that is building independence and that ability to connect of your, you know, without mum and dad there in a way that's safe and building that a little bit of independence. And I just think this stuff is really exciting. So just a couple of last things. So then it gets down to how do we build community in the city? So I'm living in an apartment block in Erskineville, and we have 267 apartments in our block. And before you go, oh my God, that sounds dreadful. It's in a square. We're 8 stories high. It's in a square, and we've kind of got a bit of garden in the middle. Not a lot because it's in a city, but enough for people to have a bit of nature. And so what has turned this community around is a real commitment to recycling. So everything gets recycled, and we have a room in the building called the Magic Room. It's a magic room of unlimited recycling possibilities, if you want the full name. And anything we don't want gets put down there, children's toys, books, you name it. And that magic room is the most popular room in the building. When workmen come in, when the guys come in to collect the rubbish, they know they can, because it's right by the dock, they're allowed to go in and help themselves to whatever they want. And one architect is so impressed, who comes to visit a friend in the building. He designs high rise, and he is actually designing magic rooms into the buildings he is designing. And so what we also have is book clubs. We have Wrap with Love Club, you know, knitting to do the blankets, across the ages. And it's a very happy space. And part of that was inspired by the Danish. I read this book called The Year of Living Danishly. It's a fabulous book. It's about a London journalist who wasn't able, she worked in magazines, and her husband got a job in Jutland in Denmark, which is in the country, and suddenly she's freelancing and has a bit of time on her hands. So she decides to write this book to explain Denmark to the world, and some of it's screamingly funny. And she makes a comment that the Danes are one of the happiest countries in the world, and guess what? Most Danes belong to up to 5 interest groups. Now, doesn't that make sense? So across a month, you are meeting 5 completely different groups of people, hopefully of all ages and diversity, who love playing the ukulele like you do, or, you know, I don't know, acrobats, whatever you want to do, knitting, painting your toenails. And you meet these people during the month, once a month. How could you possibly be lonely? And so I just want to inspire you. I mean, I'm sure the fact you're here, you are doing a lot of this stuff already, but I just think, you know, and I think now I'm about to be turned 71. I just think I couldn't imagine that my life could be so rich at this age. Not that I thought it was necessarily going to be, you know, sobbing into my handkerchief now, but I had no idea that life was going to be this rich. And, you know, I'm sure as I get older, there's going to be challenges, but I'm so excited about life, because these interactions feed my soul, because more and more I'm understanding what I need to feed me, and I'm knowing where to get it. So there we go. I'd love to hear your comments.
It's so exciting, just all the stuff you was talking about, the cities. And I just get so heartened knowing that there's intentionality about it. You know,
Yeah.
it's not just hit and miss. They actually know what work and how we can engage people. And I love the alone together. Oh my God, I love that. And I love how sometimes you are sitting there and just being around the vibrancy and
Yes.
the aliveness of other people wakens something in you. Even if you don't want to engage, you feel connected. And that thing of being alone and loneliness, it just kind of flips from one to the other, where there's that loneliness, but there's a connection. Even though you're not engaged, there's a connection. It's beautiful. So thank you for that. Wow. And Federation Square, I love Federation Square. I was there a few months ago, where we had our Silver Sirens lunch, and it does have that energy. And it's like, wow, that was intentional. It's like, yeah, they know what they were doing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, love it. Thank you so much for that. So many good things in your book. Now we've got about another 7 minutes. So Who would like to add a comment or say something? What about you, Jane? We've got our writer, Jane. Oh, Philomena, let's get to Philomena, then I'm going to come to you, Jane. Love to hear your voice. Go, Philomena, just unmute yourself.
Thanks, Faye. Thank you so much for creating this book club. I love it. Maggie, thank you so much. And all of us here, this clan, listening to you, I feel so uplifted, and I feel so at home with the orientation of your book and your presentation tonight. I was raised by a woman who, her favorite phrase was, I met a lovely person today.
Oh, how beautiful.
Every day of her life. Yes, Mum. Yes, you did. And she'd be on the street sweeping, so she'd catch a passerby. So I learned from that. And I
Yes.
passed that on to my 31-year-old, who is a magnificent human, and she's a queer woman, and she probably won't have children, but she is a Steiner teacher of children.
Oh,
Had them
fabulous.
all the way through for 5 years. Like, it's a really great principle. You know, it's a proper family.
Yes.
So you've made me really see that even though I plan to, who knows what tomorrow brings, work into my 70s,
Great.
you've given me the permission to put my little spirit into any, you know, you've reawoken that permission. So 2 things. You've given me a lot of joy listening to you tonight with possibilities, because I too am very curious. But the other thing, you've also, for me, given me a sense of responsibility to pass it on and pay it forward and keep it going. We know what we don't like. We know what doesn't feel humane. But you've relit that flame of passing on what we do know is humane. Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you. And I think the opportunity to get creative about this stuff, you know, potluck dinners, and I just think, you know, the sky's the limit, ladies, with this. And I do believe we can change the world with this stuff, because I think the world's crying out for connection.
And I see your hand, Monique. Do you mind if I just go to Jane really quickly, though? Did you want to just add something quickly, Jane? And I'll come back to you, Monique.
I just wanted to say I'm incredibly lucky because I live 1 block away from Maggie. And then we live, maybe is it 3 blocks, if that much, Maggie, away from a place called Sydney Park.
Yes.
Now, Sydney Park is a miracle that it hasn't been turned into an apartment, you know, a big complex. But if there's ever a sense of, because I work at home often by myself, you know, we a lot of us do that, but I try to make it up to Sydney Park every day, because there's always dogs running around like maniacs having the best time. And don't dogs know how to do it? Hey,
Yes.
you know, and there's that. And then, you know, school holiday times or weekends, there's kids and dogs. So that space, though, that what you've been talking about, Maggie, that, you know, being able to just sit somewhere, you don't need the coffee, don't need to talk, but you can certainly talk. You know, and people with dogs will always talk, and people with kids will always talk too. So anyway, I'm just sucking it all in and just going to leave this call with a really big fat smile on my face. So thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you,
beautiful,
Jane.
Jane. Lovely to see you. Okay, Monique, over to you.
Yeah, just 2 things I wanted to say quickly was I was very much a lone wolf kind of person for many years for different reasons. And I came across someone's mother, and everyone called her a joiner. She's a joiner. So she would make, at the local courthouse, she would make the cups of tea for the people waiting to go into the courthouse. And then she would join this, and she'd always find a little way to do it. So I changed my identity to being a joiner.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to, I've been having quite a few conversations with people, and they've just been getting quite depressed with the news and all the crazy stuff that's in the world. And I just had to say to people, like, if you're in a village in the 1800s, the only bit of news you'd be getting is the horseman that came through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just look after your own patch.
Yeah.
unless you join the UN, there's not much you can do. You just look after your own patch. I make Anzac biscuits. That's my patch. So, yeah.
That is so profound, because if we all looked after our own patch, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in some parts of the world. And I think that is totally empowering, and we can do that. Yeah.
Beautiful. That's such good timing. Sorry, did you want to say something else, Monique? You sure? Okay, we've got about another minute. Anyone else who maybe hasn't spoken that wants to add their voice? Yeah, go, Dahlia. You need to unmute, sweetheart. We can't hear you. I'm going to send you a mute. It might send you a little thing. It might be easier to press on. No. Can you hear us, Dahlia? No? Okay. Maybe while Dahlia is doing that, maybe some final words. So we still can't hear you, Dahlia. Ah, there you go.
Well, unknown caller. Ah.
It's all right. Got you.
Yeah. Anyway, I grew up in a different era, and you know, I grew up in Jerusalem, and I had 20 uncles and aunties, and it was always, you know, it was always packed, and it was always you know, we would meet, you know, we would meet every Friday, and then the holidays. And then, you know, I had 20 uncles and aunties, and everybody wanted a piece of me all my life, you know. And, you know, like, you know, you meet them and say, how come you don't visit me, Mom? You don't like me? You know, why don't you?
Oh, that's wonderful.
So this is, in my life now, it's the first time in my life that I'm living on my own. But I'm, you know, I'm such, you know, I'm living in a retirement village, and I could be lonely, but you know, I can never feel lonely, because I've always, you know, there's people around, you know, I always lived in a tribe, so I keep doing that. I keep enjoying whatever it is. You know, I go with all the oldies. You know, I call them the oldies because, you know, I'm the little girl now.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, over to you. Maybe just some final words to close us off, Maggie.
I think we're wired to connect, and, you know, I think the power of connection is something. I think as we get older, sometimes people feel that they're losing their agency to do things, and this is our power. We are the great connectors. I remember reading when we had the last horrible bushfires, and a community had been evacuated to a local school hall, and everybody was terrified. And this young journalist said what kept everybody together was a woman in her 70s, paying no heed to her own feelings, going around and comforting everybody. And she said, I'm crying as I write this, because that woman saved the kind of emotional day by being the comforter, being there, being strong. And I think that's the power of all this life experience. Not that we have to stop learning. We don't know all the answers, and we certainly don't see ourselves as being the ones who have all the knowledge, but there's a lot we can hold for others, and that's a very, very powerful thing. And I just want to commend you for creating the Silver Sirens, and for these beautiful women, because this is really significant stuff.
They say you create the community you crave, so clearly there's some part of my heart that was craving this, so I'm really grateful.
Oh, thank you so much, Faith.
Thank you. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of this beautiful book club. So if you haven't got the book, please grab it. There is a link to get the book in the newsletter that went out, but I'll also put in the newsletter, in the email that I'll send out with the recording. So if you haven't got it, there's lots of good stuff in it. You can see how much I've marked it. Lots
Oh
of
my
goodies.
God, it's a big book.
Yeah. It's a good one. Thank you again, Maggie. Thank you all for those
Thank
who came
you.
live, and for those watching the replay, any questions about the book, or if you want to get in touch with Maggie, please reach out to me. Also really happy to say that Maggie is one of our speakers at the Sydney event, our Redefine an Aging event in November, which we're looking at communities. And the first part of the day is 3 women who have created communities, and Maggie is one of them. And then the second part is about the strength of female friendship, when we've got Tracy Spicer and Yumi Steins talk about their enduring friendship, especially as Tracy was going through long COVID. So the whole day is all about connection. So we've got this whole day planned for you. I've just booked the cinema at the Ridges, which is where we're having the event, for us to screen Shirley Valentine in the evening. So we're going to be there the whole day. So if you're around, come and join me. If you're not in Sydney, still come, because we've got special discount at the hotel. So if you want to come and spend the weekend with us. So thank you all for being here, and always so fantastic being with my community. Lots of love to you all, and I hope to see you for the next one.